Awesome. Hey everyone, I am Gabby, and I can't be with y'all today, so I decided to record a little clip, I guess, of my overview and some remarks I had on the Teaching Gloria Anzaldúa as an American Philosopher chapter. I've also created a mural board that I'll share the link. I'll share this link on the discussion forum or something. But I have the discussion questions here. Feel free to, I've already kind of started a little on a few of them. Um, Hopefully I have time to kind of go through them. If not, feel free to, you know, continue the discussion without me, with me virtually. I've also added this little practical takeaways from the reading that I came across. Feel free to add more. There are bullet points there for you. And then a little something about the author that, I don't want to take too much time talking about the author. I think it's enough to say that they're a professor of philosophy over at UT, Rio Grande Valley. So with that, I'll just kind of hover over hover over the discussion questions while I read my little overview. Um, so Alexander Sten uses the framework of self-culture to argue that Anzaldúa is a philosopher. This chapter describes how he teaches Anzaldúa as an American philosopher at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, among other spaces. Sten begins the chapter by centering his positionality as a monolingual speaker of mixed white heritages that include German, English, Scottish, Irish, and Ukrainian Jewish, as well as a child who grew up in a middle-class home in which his Mexican-American nana helped raise him. He shares that he didn't read Borderlands until graduate school while finishing up a dissertation on classical US American pragmatism and Latin American philosophy of liberation. Sten highlights Anzaldúa's critique of dominant cultures and what Sten calls a liberatory philosophical consciousness as insightful for his own work. Despite pushback from students, Sten argues that Anzaldúa was a philosopher. In order to demonstrate this, Sten asks the reader to consider Anzaldúa as a philosopher in line with other philosophers in American history. In the first part of the chapter, Sten raises the problem of presenting Anzaldúa as a philosopher in both the classroom and within the field of philosophy. According to Sten, trained philosophers do not recognize her work, and students find it difficult to entertain the idea of Anzaldúa as a philosopher. Through primary and secondary sources, Sten provides compelling evidence that Anzaldúa identified as a philosopher. To be a philosopher, Sten argues, one must be self-reflexive. This is a praxis that Anzaldúa left the world. Sten then elaborates on the self-culture he uses to define Anzaldúa as a philosopher, underscoring self-culture's use of self-improvement and education. Moreover, Sten shares that in order to get to this stage of the course, he situates other American figures in line with the self-culture narrative, like Benjamin Franklin and Frederick Douglass, as Sten finds it easier to argue these historical figures follow the self-culture narrative. That way, when he teaches or assigns Borderlands, the students are more inclined to accept Anzaldúa as also fitting into the self-culture category. By the end of the chapter, Sten acknowledges the limitations of this approach, as Anzaldúa was someone who transcended borders. Still, Sten argues that the objective of this class or of this course is to engage or encourage students to think beyond social constructs. So some remarks. I chose this piece because I consider myself a historian of American history that focuses on 20th century. That said, most history I come across in American history is Eurocentric, and historical figures like Anzaldúa help move away from this focus. However, this does not exempt Anzaldúa from critique. Here I am thinking about the use of Nahuatl in Anzaldúa's writing. As someone who comes from a line of Nawa speakers, I know that Nahuatl can be, for some Nawa communities, can be seen as archaic and backwards. My own mother refused to teach it to me out of fear that I would become more India. In 2020, I found a collective from Southern California that taught me Nahuatl from the La Huasteca region along the Gulf of Mexico. From those courses, I learned a few things. Number one, Nahuatl is not a monolithic language. It varies by region. Two, Nahuatl has evolved even in the last 500 years. It's gone through its classical and modern phases. Number three, Nahuatl communities, those who only speak Nahuatl, are often taken advantage of by Spanish-speaking institutions like medicine and law. While I appreciate Ansaldúa for grappling with Nahuatl and using it to create theory, I can only use it as a point of departure. If I were teaching my students about Ansaldúa, I would, one, encourage them to speak in the language they feel most comfortable in without imposing Nahuatl. Two, remind students that Nahuatl is not a monolithic language. Three, acknowledge that there are many, many Nahuatl speakers alive today who continue to be harassed for speaking it. Four, emphasize that Nahuatl is a living language because its speakers have preserved it. Five, we have platforms today because of collective work from elders and younger generations. Six, note that Nahuatl, or that the Nahuatl that Ansaldúa uses falls in line with the classical Nahuatl, and that we have other ways of writing today. Kali with a K in lieu of Kali with a C, Kali meaning house. That's just one example. Seven, consider how Nahuatl was a lingua franca and the implications of that. Lastly, I would also like to consider how Nahuatl is taught along with the Ansaldúa lessons. It's not enough to say, I don't know how to say it. Students must be given the opportunity to learn how to properly pronounce words like Coyolxauhqui and Tlamatini, and even the word Nahuatl. And I say this because I'm not going to go on a rant here. If you want to hear my rant, feel free to, catch me after class. But I hear a lot of scholars say things like Nahuatl. And let me just say, as someone who comes from a Nahuatl speaking home, that is incorrect. Do not say that. Please, dear God, I beg you, do not say that. If you hear somebody else saying it, tell them not to. It's Nahuatl, Nahuatl, Nahuatl. And I know the TL is a very difficult sound to make, but you just got to practice it. Just the way that you practice any other language, you have to practice the TL, you have to practice the Nahuatl. And so I would encourage you to, one, if possible, take classes, but, definitely, I guess, keep in mind if you're going to teach anything in any other language, and it's maybe not yours, have the courtesy to learn how to pronounce things from, the communities who speak it, just, FYI. So anyways, I don't know if I think I'll attach the Google Doc I just read to you, but underneath that, and hopefully I can add it to this, maybe I can in real time, maybe not. I can, maybe I can, no, I'll add it later. But there's a Nahuatl dictionary that is produced, I think, through the University of Oregon. That is very helpful. It's been very helpful in my own learning of Nahuatl, learning, I guess, and relearning. But I think I'm out of time, and I just wanted to leave y'all with some questions here. I think the one thing I found most useful through this reading is how do we talk about historical figures that, may potentially be problematic, or some of the things that they're saying may be potentially problematic. I get a lot of feedback from others who say Ansaldúa, is totally just using Nahuatl and isn't really consulting people who are, native speakers and whatnot. I don't know how to reconcile with that. just because I'm not totally familiar with Ansaldua's historical narrative. If y'all know where she ends up learning Nahuatl outside of books, feel free to like let me know if you have any resources, or like I know what's his name? Sten uses the papers at the through the Benson collection, or the Gloria papers through the Benson collection, through the University of Texas. But if you have any other places where, you know, we might want to look, feel free to, you know, let me know. But I'll leave you with these questions. I'll, you know, try to add more to it. I really kind of wish I was there in person, but I can't be there in person this week. Anyways, I will leave it here, and I hope to hear from y'all